Hello. Thank you everyone for joining in. Hopefully everyone can hear us all right. Steve, feel free to let me know if I'm not coming in. But looks like give it a couple of minutes. Looks like everyone's settled in, so a couple more joining, but we won't delay any longer. So thank you everyone for joining for the bars and CASA how to manage both simultaneously, which is quite a mouthful, webinar today. So for those who just joined us for this is your first webinar. We do this quite regularly with industry experts in the drone industry, and basically we get a lot of questions, a lot of confusion on certain topics, and this was one we've gotten fairly recently and fairly often. So we thought probably no one else better to have this question and share some learnings, some thoughts, and answer some questions hopefully for around this topic. So we're joined by Steve Griffin today, so Chief Pilot, CASA delegate. So I thought when this question came up, we thought there's probably no one else better who can answer this and knows their stuff more. So without further ado, welcome everyone, and I'll like to introduce everyone to Steve. So Steve, thanks for coming on board.
Hi, thanks for inviting me, Alex.
No worries at all, mate. No, and I was going to say maybe we'll just give a bit of a snapshot to yourself and your background. If you have a minute, maybe just a bit about your career. You're pretty bit of an aviation veteran, I'd say. You've got a fair bit of experience, so I'd love to hear a bit about your journey and how you got to this point in drones.
Yeah, cool. All right. I started playing with things that fly when I was at school. Really, in my early teens, I was living in Maribor in Queensland. I used to go out and wash aeroplanes. They were running the sand mining over on Gari, as it's called now, Fraser Island. I used to wash the planes so I could get a free ride in the aeroplane. And sort of went on. Mum and Dad didn't have the money to put me through flying lessons, so I ended up taking a job as an apprentice radio tech back in the day, and started flying. I had to move to Brisbane for that job, so I was living at Kangaroo Point. Used to ride my bike down to Archerfield and go for my weekly lesson in my mighty Tomahawk. So I got my PPL when I was 17 and CPL a couple of years after that in aeroplanes. And around the time I got the CPL in the aeroplanes, I discovered balloons. It was a completely weird thing. And I ended up getting a commercial balloon license as well early on, and spent 25 years or so flying balloons commercially. We had a charter business in Brisbane. With that, we did a bit of charter in general aviation aeroplanes, had a flying school attached to that as well. We got out of that about 2012. I'd had 25 years of being up before the sun 6 days a week, and the novelty of that wore off. And around that time, CASA approached me as to be a flying ops inspector with them. And I put my hand up. Probably wasn't the wisest thing at the time, but we did that. And I went there for a couple of years as a flying ops inspector. Didn't really suit me. And I was walking out the door when they offered me a job as a drone inspector. They were recruiting and they had some internal transfers. So I went there. I sort of shifted out of the flying ops role into a drone role. I did that from sort of middle of 2014 to 2016. The drone stuff, or the CASA environment still didn't suit me, so we left. And I ended up going back ballooning very briefly. Picked up a couple of contracts around the place. One in Kenya, flying in the Masai Mara, which is pretty cool.
Awesome.
And a friend invited me to a project that he was on as chief pilot for a project called Astigan, just developing a high altitude, long endurance drone. It was 28-meter wingspan aeroplane, solar electric, that was designed to fly sort of at flight level 600 plus up in the stratosphere. I worked on that for 3 years, which is a super interesting role. Everything was bleeding edge every step of the way. Everything that we did was new and had problems. So it was really, really good fun. But it was the factory for the aircraft was in the UK. We were doing the low altitude flying in central Spain at a place called Teruel, and the high altitude stuff was out of Alice or east of Alice Springs.
Mm.
So for those 3 years, I kind of orbited the Earth. I was pretty comfortable in aeroplanes
Mm.
as a passenger during that time.
Great.
And then sort of that took a bit of a pause. We had some issues with flight controllers that were going to take some time to resolve. So around then, I picked up the gig as a delegate doing the REOCs, and I've been doing that for a bit over 6 years now. So that keeps me pretty involved in the RPAS industry. We do the majority of initial issue REOCs in Australia now, several hundred of them a year.
Wow. Wow.
Uh,
And that and is that how
uh,
you oh sorry, I was gonna say, is that how you transitioned over to bars? Was that sort of similar? How did you get involved with that?
yeah, so so the bars stuff, um, they we were getting some people asking about bars,
Hmm.
and I've got a strong interest in aviation safety and safety management stuff, um, uh, and the bars thing sort of sparked my curiosity, so I went and did the bars auditors course,
Hmm.
and got picked up by one of the audit companies to do some audits. I've done a dozen or so bars audits over the last couple of years. But it's a very good program, but it's a big step up
Mm.
for Australian drone operators.
Mm.
Um,
I was gonna say that
I've
might be.
done yeah.
I was gonna
So
say that might.
that's kind of we'll get into that a bit more, I guess,
Yeah,
as this
I was gonna say
progresses.
I think that's a perfect lead in for the next question, I think. So that's the sort of, and firstly, thanks for that background. It's I think between the CASA and the bar side of things, I think you've got a perfect amount of experience in both to really shed some light on this. So yeah, exactly what you were just saying then. So I think perfect timing. Bars, I guess, for probably people of varying quantities of understanding of this area. I guess from your perspective, what is bars, and maybe a snapshot of, I guess, yeah, where does it come from, and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah. But the bar was years ago, and it was really born out of the extraordinary costs that the mining industry was seeing with regard to misadventures in their contracted aviation services. So the the mining industry generally is a very large user of aviation services.
Mhm.
The top six of the bar's member organisations own and operate 66 airports globally.
Wow.
They transport the they transport about 2.5 million passengers a year, and their annual spend is upwards of $650 million.
Interesting.
Now, prior to the implementation, they were having lots of troubles with those contracted services. Before bars, they had an average of 160 fatalities a year uh, in, in within their contracted aviation services, and you can imagine the cost of that would be extraordinary.
Mm.
Like,
And is that
apart from the
globally? Is that
the
globally too, Steve?
social impact of that.
Yeah.
That was globally, yeah.
Right. Yep.
Um, so they so the there was a group of about 30 mining industry companies got together and said, we've got to sort this. The costs are too high.
Mm.
So they came up with the bars standard, and it was designed by them specifically to address those areas where they were seeing repeat issues that were leading to injuries, fatalities, or significant payouts for compensation or lost productivity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very practical standard. It's focused right on those things that were costing them money or causing them grief. That's been going for, it's close on 10 years now.
Right.
And they're up to version 13 or something of the standard now.
Wow.
Um,
And is that still
uh,
pretty sort of focused on, as you said, the mining side is where it all sort of began, but the
yes,
resource
yeah,
and power, and is that sort of, yeah, where does it sort of spread
yeah.
to now?
So it's yeah, so bars it was born out of the mining industry. It has expanded a bit now, and they've just recently added, or they've put in another section that covers oil and gas. Previously, that's been covered under a different standard, IOSA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but bars is sort of becoming a bit more the weapon of choice for high risk industries
Gotcha.
for accreditation of contracted aviation services.
Gotcha.
Now,
Okay.
with the increased use of drones within the mining sector, uh, by the way, last year they'd taken their 160 fatalities. They had 6 last year globally,
Wow. Wow.
and
Fantastic.
so despite the costs of running the bars program and getting people accredited,
Mm.
they've saved an enormous amount of money
Mm.
um, just by reducing the losses that they've had.
Mm.
So they uh, decided that they've seen a number of problems within RPAS, and about 3 or 4 years ago, they decided that they would introduce an RPAS standard to
Right.
try and knock some of that stuff on the head. The standard is quite similar to what's in the crude aviation standard,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been tailored a bit. We're on version 4 of the standard now, so there have been some updates to it, and I understand they're working on another uh, sort of amendment to it now. There's a couple of elements in the standard that are a bit lumpy for RPAS at the moment, but they're
Right.
working through them.
Still sort of evolving. Okay, great. Okay, so in sort of summary, in that it's born out of the mining, but moving into the high risk sort of resource area, international sort of far higher level, higher risk standard, with the goal of productivity, but also loss of life has been a massive change. So that's super interesting, and it's a great statistics. Um, awesome. So I guess looking at that there, so relevant to those high risk industries, mining, power, sort of international flights, I guess. Is there what is required? I guess people sort of reach out, and I guess people understanding what is bars firstly, and then if it is relevant to them, what does that look like if they say, oh, okay, I think I probably should be bars. What's the steps is sort of involved to that?
Yeah. Okay. So the bars standard really just sits on top of. It doesn't replace CASA's requirements, but it's got some additional requirements to what CASA has for operating drones. So it's most of the bars requirements align fairly well uh, with the CASA requirements. I haven't become aware of anywhere you've got a dead set conflict. You can either do bars or you can do CASA. There's just in CASA world we use a job safety assessment. In bars world they call it an operational risk assessment, which contains all of the CASA requirements plus a few extras.
Right.
Uh, so it's not it is just a bit of some additional criteria to try and manage the bits that they've seen issues with.
Right. Okay.
As far as getting the BARS accreditation, the BARS accreditation requires you to go through an audit. So you need to have procedures within your documentation. Some of those will sit within the ops manual. A number of them are just can be external policy documents. Like there's got to be a commitment to safety. If you're using external maintenance providers, there's an expectation that you'll have some sort of service level agreement in place, just so that people who are doing this maintenance work are doing it to an acceptable standard. There's a requirement for them to sort of have trained staff and use current documentations. The audits are annual, and once you've been in the system for a couple of years and you've done all right in the audits, you can get onto a reduced auditing requirement. So I think that takes 3 years to get
A couple
to.
of years. Okay, so sort of prove that you're abiding by it and sort of reduce risk, they can sort of distance that a little bit
Yeah.
more. Okay, awesome. Great. Well, that probably goes on to that next question. I guess maybe you're saying before that the BARS sort of sits over the top. I guess CASA obviously being for Australia, but this is probably pretty common when we hear a lot of, I'm already doing my CASA regulations. I'm abiding by it. I seem to be okay in that sense. Why should I even look at BARS? And if I do, what does that change? You mentioned a few before, but I guess how does that, what do the operations, I guess, look like in a CASA perspective after BARS gets introduced? You're saying the different JSA is called something different. Is there anything else that gets added, or what does those sort of processes look like?
There's similar but subtly different things, like your pre-flight checks. There's a couple of extra elements in there. There's things like within the CASA standard, they don't say if the weather turns horrible, there's nothing. CASA doesn't specify anything, any particular course of action if the weather goes sad. In BARS, they say if the weather goes sad, you need to be on the ground. It's a black and white thing. You not to continue flying if the weather conditions aren't suitable.
Right.
And along with that, you have to specify the weather conditions that are your limits. So it's documented. These are what is acceptable. If we go beyond that, we're pulling the pin.
Right.
So there's a bit more detail in some of these elements than what we're used to under the CASA scheme. Interestingly, I've done a few BARS audits internationally, and despite people sort of thinking that CASA is difficult to get along with and that the CASA requirements are hard, other jurisdictions like Kazakhstan, I did one. People would say, "Oh, Kazakhstan, they'll get away with anything." Well, they got one finding out of the audit, whereas I've seen companies in Australia that have thought that they are very good have ended up in the 20 findings on the audit.
Wow.
So,
wow.
In Australia, I think we started out pretty much at the top of the pack with the rules for drones, but we haven't kept pace with what other people are doing. But we've got a lot of, my impression is, or my view is that we've got a lot of fluff and inappropriate requirements in our rule set now.
Right.
That don't really add to safety. There's just nonsense stuff in there that probably should be removed. Put some things in there that do actually and shown and proven to actually give a safety benefit.
And is that, and you mentioned some before there too about weather, and that sort of makes complete sense, particularly for sort of some of these organizations. Is there any, do you have any other examples, I guess, of companies that go into bars? It's obviously weather now plays a more important factor. Is there anything, I guess, with maintenance in respects to other areas of the program? Are there any other
Yeah,
changes?
so yeah, the like within the bars program, they ask you there's a list of criteria that you should consider when you're going to purchase a drone. So,
Mhm.
and they say, well, okay, here's our list of things that as a bars operator, you're expected to consider at least when you're purchasing a new drone.
Mhm.
Some of them are mandatory things like you have to have your ground control station must show the position of the drone. It must show the quality of the link, must show the number of satellites that are connected. Uh, now, in CASA world, that none of that's specified. But in bars, they spell out these are the things you need to consider. There's they don't say it's got to have this particular performance requirement
Mhm.
in most cases, but they say you need to think about this when you're going there. So it's sort of expanding on and just covering the bases so that people do actually think about uh, their operations. Of course, there are some compulsory things, like if you're doing underground operations, and the machine must be intrinsically safe. It's not going to start fires underground. So there are some mandatory components to it, but
Mhm.
a lot of it is consider it as part of the thing. They also have a mandatory change management
Interesting. Okay.
requirement. So if you're going to change your operation, you need to actually formally have a think about how that's going to affect your operations and the safety of your operations.
Right, right, okay. And is that so? Because what I'm sort of wondering is, I know that CASA, there's certain areas where we've previously spoken about this in different webinars of, as long as you can, not as long, but you should be able to show and justify, the way you've done it. You've got to make sure you abide by ops manual. But I guess I've heard in the past that having bars sort of shows that next elite level of you doing this extra work and taking this extra risk mitigation that CASA looks favorably upon people who implement bars. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but does it sort of play
Yeah,
that little adding factor to it?
yeah. I don't know that there's nothing written down that each CASA will take a favourable view if you've got bars, but certainly uh, if you've got bars accreditation, you're doing you will be doing more
Hmm.
than what CASA expects as a minimum standard. So
Gotcha. Okay. So it's more of for Australians, I guess it's that CASA is the minimum sort of level, and then bar sort of adds that extra bit of risk mitigation, probably more suited to the high risk industries, and then probably high risk as well as if there's those who operate internationally. I would imagine it's quite relevant to them as well because it goes probably crosses borders there with the bars as well. Um,
yep.
Awesome. Great. That sort of answers that one. I was going to say there's some cool questions. I saw someone with their hand up before, but we might just leave it at the end for a couple of questions if that's all right. And then, but please save them up and definitely add them to the chat towards the end. So, um, I guess looking back at we speak to a couple of people who will be thinking about getting their bars and think it's right for them. Some have started the sort of process. A lot of people it's new to the industry in certain ways. I guess where we what are the main difficulties you've seen companies go through? I guess if you could sort of warn them or flag it or let them know, hey, be aware of these things if you go through bars. Have you seen any sort of difficulties? As you said, there's 25 flags happened in some of the Australian companies, but only one in Kazakhstan. Definitely don't share any secret information, but there's certain sort of roadblocks and red flags you keep seeing companies come up against that you think they should be aware of.
Yeah, I think the majority of companies that I've gone to and for an initial audit have underestimated the amount of work that's required to get up to standard. So when you go through a bars audit, you need to have documented procedures, but you also have to show evidence of implementation. Okay,
Right.
the two are very different. Okay, so bars standard requires that you have established some safety KPI. So you need to have within your documentation somewhere where you've assessed your performance against KPI, and you need to be able to validate. You need to, so if you've made a change, and one very senior bars auditor said to me once, when you walk in for a bars audit, there should be at least one change management process thing on the table, and that is the decision to go down the bars track. So it's a significant body of work. It is not inexpensive. The bars audit, a base audit, I think the Flight Safety Foundation fee is $8,500. Then there's the travel costs, accommodation costs and stuff for the auditor if they're travelling to get to your site. And so your annual audit cost is probably approaching $20,000 Aussie before you put everything together and keep your documentation up to speed with the bars requirements through the year. So it's not cheap. My experience is that the mining companies that are demanding bars accreditation understand that, and they expect to pay a premium for services that are delivered by bars companies. So, but it is quite difficult for smaller operators to keep shelling out that sort of $25,000 a year audit fees to maintain their bars accreditation, unless they're in a situation where all that they're doing is bars work. It's probably difficult to justify.
Right. Okay. So, and as you say, so it sounds like sort of understanding what you don't bite off more than you can chew. Understand that it is a decent process, can be expensive, and it's if you're going to do it, you got to sort of take it pretty seriously.
It is definitely a commitment that requires time and financial resources.
Right. Okay. And is there, and again, I'm probably pretty sure there's no exact answer to this, but is there sort of indicators or things you're sort of saying you should only do it if it's necessary? I'd imagine for contractors, if they need to go to a site and that's a necessity for them to operate on that site, it makes total sense. But I guess for the owner operators, is there anything that sort of happens or that would trigger someone to say, I think we probably need bars moving forward? Is there anything like that, or is it probably just, I guess, a safety culture perspective?
The trigger will be the bars company or the contracting company saying, I want you to have bars.
Right. Okay.
That's usually the trigger for most people. They've been doing work for one of the bars member companies historically, and that company is now saying, if you want to continue to do work on our site, you're going to have to go down this street.
You need to have it here.
And that's not the local branch of the company saying that. It's generally the head office in the States, wherever it is. They're saying, okay, we're upping the ante on this. We've been seeing issues. They're costing us money. We don't want that to lead to fatalities. Going to start them, and you've got that.
Great. Okay. Good.
This is happening. In fact, some of the bigger miners in Australia, like Rio, still haven't got their internal RPAS operations bars accredited, but they're working towards it.
Right.
So over the next few years, it will become more prevalent. It's relatively new at the moment, but within 3 or 4 years, I would think if you want to work on a mine site, you're going to have bars.
It's going to become the standard. Right. Okay, great. I'm just looking at time. I was sorry, there was a heap of other questions I had, and I'd love to learn more, but we might. I don't want to take up everyone's time and yourself as well. But that was really helpful. From a drone and selfishly, obviously, got nothing to do with Fly Freely, but I guess from just a drone system management perspective, how does that fit into bars? Is that you're saying those different JSAs, those different forms? How does I guess how could you prepare for that? Is it similar to like a CASA audit, just getting everything in line, or how does a drone management sort of have to fit into it? I'd imagine better sort of follow-ups for the maintenance and different ways of doing your forms.
Well, without uh, a drone, a management platform of some sort, it's going to be almost impossible to keep the records that you need to keep and
Right.
keep track of the records. So I know within Fly Freely, there's some customized form. I know that you guys are doing some development now to cover off some of the specific things that bars has in the background that you need to cover. But that's another piece of that puzzle and that you need to kind of address.
Right. So having all the records in shape for similar to CASA, but now for bars for a couple of different areas, making sure you
Bars, yeah,
report on that
yeah.
correctly. Great, great. Again, more questions, but I'm talking too much. I apologize. So I think for you sort of answered this a little bit before. So usually coming from the owner operators. So when should companies consider going for their bars? It's sort of for the contractors, yep, that makes total sense. For the owner operators, is it, as you said, from their head office sort of calls in and says, we got to step up our ante? Sounds like in the next couple of years, you foresee this being the sort of industry standard for mining and resource operations. Is it just for the mining guys, or do you see it sort of going into other industries as well?
Well, yeah, well, bars is certainly the Flight Safety Foundation is trying to expand the scope of the program to make it the accreditation program of choice.
Right.
So that's why they've just released the IOSA sort of oil and gas sort of add-on bid.
Hmm.
And I think they've got some other sort of programs that they're trying to, or other industries that they're targeting as well. So I'm
Yeah.
not
Right.
privy to exactly where they're going, but
Right. Okay. Great. Great. Um, all right. I think that was pretty much the main questions there, and I try to always keep these to half an hour, but there's always some really good insights. I was keen to ask more questions, but I'll stop my questions there. For everyone who's on the line, that's all Steve's info there. If anyone wants to reach out and ask a question, and Steve, I think you were saying before you've got a new ops manual. Am I saying that too prematurely, or is there something you want to share with everyone on the call?
yeah, we have just got a manual specifically developed based on the latest of the CASA templates, but we went through. It's a single manual, ops manual, but it's got the added bars bits in. It simplifies the the getting the documentation sorted. There's still, even with that, there's still a body of work required to get the implementation evidence if someone was going to embark on the bars program. Um, if people are looking at going down this track, probably the best advice I can give is to go to the Flight Safety Foundation website and download the bars standard and the implementation guide for the bars RPAS standard. Those two documents will tell you exactly what bars is about, and the implementation guide tells you what the auditors are expecting to see into the audit. Uh,
Great.
the things that are listed in there aren't optional; they all have to be there. So where there's six items listed in the implementation guide, you're expected to have all six, not pick the two that suit you best.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I was going to say, well, I'll include that. I think we send out the recording. I'll make sure to add the website in there for the flight safety areas there and the implementation guide. So I think that'd be a good place to
Yeah,
start.
yeah.
Great. Yeah. And again, if anyone's got questions for Steve, feel free to send your questions now. If anyone's still on there, wants to put some through and we can start answering those. Whilst people are sending any questions through, I will say we are doing some stuff. We sent out a little while ago. Thanks to Steve, we got some really good insights in order of our platform as well. And we're hopefully building that more around and configuring it to help people be a bit more bars friendly for their requirements. So for both the owner operator and the contractors. So if anyone wants to follow in, just purely keep up to date. We love hearing feedback and what other people are going through. It's all very new still. So we'll send out releases and ideas and what we're thinking and new changes. So if anyone wants to follow along, feel free to scan that and follow along. But trying to see if there is, here we go, Q&A. Got some coming through. I might read a few out, Steve, if that's all right. So we've got one from Luke. So this kind of scares me as an owner operator. Bars sounds like a program to kill off the owner operators, if I'm reading that right. Any thoughts on that one, Steve?
It's not designed to kill anyone off. And if you try and a lot of owner operators loose, I guess, with the documentation. You can't be like that with bars. Everything needs to be documented.
Mm-hmm.
You won't do it, I don't believe, without some compliance management software or compliance management system. You just won't keep track of it. But for the most part, it is just a small step up from the CASA requirement and a couple of additional things, but they're all scaled to the amount of work that you're doing and the complexity of the jobs.
Right. So it'll vary, I guess, if they're doing sort of one flight every now and again versus quite sort of regular as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, right, right. Okay, hopefully that Luke, if you had any more questions on that one, but hopefully that covered that one there. Another one we had also from someone asking, what was the website again? Sorry for the bars info, and it's flightsafety.org. So I'll send that through just on the chat there if you want to have a look there. But I'll send that through out in the recording after this as well. So I'll send out all the results as all the links as well for people to jump to. Got that one there. Okay, we've got another one. Here we go. Come through. So we got one from Robert asking, battery management is a big part of RPAS operations. Is an auditor looking at a standalone battery management plan document, or can it be incorporated into the ops manual?
The bar standard doesn't specify how you keep these records. You could do it either way. The CASA requirement is that you do it in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements. If you want to step that up, you could put it in your ops manual. I'm sure CASA wouldn't object to that. If you wanted to have it as a standalone thing, I have seen both situations used at audit, and they've both been fine.
Right, okay. And is that so? I guess if putting in that ops manual, then that becomes part of their CASA obligation as well. So that'd be ideally if they're going to do it, they sort of follow it regardless. But then having it separate, I guess, would that just mean the ops manual, you follow that in terms of CASA, and for the bars, that's a whole different area. As far as admin, sounds like
Yeah,
combining the two might be a bit easier.
yeah, yeah. So you might have in your ops manual, you might say, we'll maintain the batteries in accordance, or maintain charge the batteries in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements. That's the CASA requirement. But then if you've got specifics about how you're going to cycle them, or retention periods and things that you want to stipulate, then you might choose to not have that in your ops manual where it's in CASA's eyes, and they might. Okay, if it's in your ops manual, they can question it.
Mm.
So that's why, in a number of cases, there's a policy document that sits alongside the ops manual, which you haven't got to show to CASA, so it's not their concern.
Mm. Right. Okay. So combining the two for a simpler administrative would make sense, but then yeah, that means whatever's in the ops manual, you're now obligated towards CASA, as opposed to keeping them separate for different areas. So yeah. Okay. Great. We've got another one that's just come through. So from Luke. So he said the paperwork / compliance does not concern me. It's the 20K a year. That is 15 times on what I'm paying now to keep compliant. Or are you saying if I'm only doing 10 to 15 flights a year, it would be 20K a year estimated? Oh, sorry, it won't be 20K a year.
The audit, the cost of the audit is it's a fixed fee audit, $8,500 plus whatever the audit company chooses to add on for travel, accommodation type costs.
Right.
So
Okay.
the 8,500 US is kind of the minimum, and that's paid directly to the Flight Safety Foundation.
Right, and then on top of that is the
there'll be no so for a company that has been doing 10 to 15 flights a year, it probably is a challenge to justify, and that's what I said. Like you need to consider whether this is right for your business model. If you can go and find 10 to 15 jobs on a non-bars site, then that might be a better option.
Yeah, right.
Than going down the bars track.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking that even there's probably some ideas of the ROI for bars as well, right? Like I guess the frequency of operations and who those clients are. If that makes sense for them, then it probably worthwhile getting it. But if it's only a small amount, maybe not. Okay, great. Well, hopefully that answers that one there, Luke. I think there was another one here. So, does Flight Safety Foundation have evidence that each of the bar's requirements have a positive safety outcome?
I don't know that I haven't seen any specific documentation around that, but with the knowledge of the way the standard was developed, that it was based on areas where the member organisations developed it based on problems that they'd seen. So I think that's kind of the answer. They haven't put things in that weren't causing problems. It's the bar's member organisations trying to control the risks where they've seen problems.
Right. So it's all been born out of some form of occurrence or necessity that's been set up.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Hopefully that answered that one there. Hasn't got any more coming through, but I was going to say if anything does once we finish up, because I've just gone over time, but anything else pops up there, feel free to reach out to Steve there. That's his email and his website. We'll send out the recording for this a little bit later. And yeah, if anyone have any questions or thoughts or ideas or concerns, feel free to reach out to us. We're always keen to hear feedback from the industry, but Steve's definitely in trusted hands. He knows his stuff clearly. So any questions, technical side, I'd give that over to Steve. But if there's no more questions, I want to say thanks very much, Steve. Really appreciate it. I know you're about to go on holidays very soon on a well-deserved break. So thanks for making the time and sharing with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Alex. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions, so feel free to contact me. I am heading off on a few weeks holiday tomorrow, but I might answer emails in between sort of
If you can
holiday
get your
bits.
time. Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, mate. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for dialing in. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Always keen to hear feedback or any ideas for future ones. Let us know. Thanks very much.